Strong views on that. What is your reaction? 03444991000. Let's talk about this very, very worrying story. Plans for the largest seizure of GP data in NHS history are unlawful, and the government faces an urgent legal challenge unless the scheme is stopped and changed, according to a pre-action letter sent today on behalf of 5 organisations and a Conservative MP. Tech Justice non-profit Foxglove are supporting this group, Just Treatment, Doctors Association UK, the Citizens Open Democracy and the National Pensioners Convention, as well as David Davis MP. They all want to take the scheme to court. The coalition's legal letter sent today to the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS Digital warns that unless the government pauses the grab of confidential patient data from GPs and seeks meaningful patient consent, the group will seek an injunction to halt the scheme. The urgent move follows a decision by DHSC and NHS Digital to seize the entire GP records of all 55 million patients in England. A deadline of just 6 weeks, by the 23rd of June, has been set for patients to learn about the scheme and opt out if they want to by submitting a form to their GP. If a patient fails to opt out by the deadline, their health record goes to the central store. Basically, it's very, very concerning. Let's get reaction now from our next guest. Corrie Kreider is the director of Tech Justice non-profit Foxglove. Hi, Corrie.
Hey there.
Thanks very much for joining us. So what exactly might be done with this medical information?
Well, that is a fantastic question, and why we're so concerned about all of this, because while the health department, Matt Hancock, have said, well, we'd really like to pool this together for planning and research, they've been incredibly vague about who's going to access this data and what for. And I think lots of your listeners would say, well, sure, if the health service needs it to plan my care or improve the NHS, that's fine. But it's clear if you read the fine print that, for example, companies are going to be able to access this data. And at the moment, people haven't been told about it, and they haven't been given any say about it. And the point of this case is you just can't do that. You can't grab the health records of 55 million people without telling people what you're doing and getting their consent. There is no public health without public trust. And the way the government has gone about this doesn't inspire public trust. It really erodes it.
Yes, and the problem is that people just don't have the awareness to opt out.
No, they have absolutely no idea this is going on. The way the government chose to inform people was to bung it up on a single government website and put out a tweet that's been retweeted about 3 times. No one knows that this is happening. And they've been given people just until the 23rd of June for you to hear about it, decide how you feel about all and sundry potentially accessing your medical record, and write to your GP. If you are an older person, you won't have heard about this. If you're vulnerable, if you're not online, you will have literally no idea that this is happening, which is why we're saying if the government don't stop this and extend the deadline, think again and talk to people, we're going to take them to court. The other thing I would say is, because you mentioned the groups who are taking this government to court, it is not often that you have everybody from doctors to pensioners, to David Davis, the Conservative MP, to the Guardian journalist Carol Cadwalader on the same press release and in the same case.
Absolutely. They don't share the same politics,
together,
do they?
Something's wrong.
Yeah, indeed. So what would you tell my listeners to do? If they're concerned, what is their best course of action?
You've got several things you can do. So the nonprofit Med Confidential have an opt-out guide. You should Google Med Confidential, how to opt out if you want to opt out. You should look at our case. We have a case crowdfunder. If you go to the Foxglove Twitter or Foxglove website, you should support this case, because if we don't buy people time, then I'm glad your listeners have heard about it, but actually it'll be too late for the vast majority of people in England to have their say about this. So we've really got to take the government to court. And so you should look at that and support our crowdfunder, because these are nonprofits taking a cost risk to fight for everybody's right to a say in their medical records. So go to Foxglove Legal on Twitter, go to the Foxglove website, and help us stop the grab of GP data.
Corrie, let's indulge in a bit of catastrophizing. What's the worst thing that can be done with this information?
Well, I mean, if somebody were to misuse the information and re-identify it, I suppose all kinds of dodgy things can happen. Think about what is actually in the record. It is all kinds of personal medical data. It is information about someone's addiction. It's information about whether somebody was abused, erectile dysfunction, all kinds of potentially embarrassing or sensitive information has gone into this. Now, the government say, oh, well, it's pseudonymized. It's not anonymous, but a fake identifier has gone in there. Some kind of substitution's been made. But they also say that in some circumstances, re-identification would be permitted. So I think you're talking about concerns around companies accessing and profiting off of their access to this incredible data set of vast commercial data, and potentially concerns about security and leakages. But I think the main concern actually is trust and eroding the relationship of trust between patients and their GP. We are all open with our GP because we don't think that when we sit down with our family GP, that information is then going to be available to all and sundry. And that actually, I think, is the biggest risk of this system, is that if it goes forward ahead as it is, people are not going to be open with their doctor. The so-called jewel in the crown of the NHS, general practice, just won't be the same if we can't protect people's information.
It seems like another land grab of our civil liberties, which is very characteristic of this pandemic.
Well, exactly. I mean, and the other thing, of course, we've seen in the pandemic is that all kinds of companies, all and sundry, everybody from Lex Greensill to Matt Hancock's Publican, feels like they can kind of siphon off cash from the NHS during the pandemic while people aren't looking. But actually, if this is people's health data, then this is people's choice. Everybody should have a choice in what happens to their records.
And also, shouldn't it default? Corey, well, let's talk about pauses, right? But shouldn't it default to staying where it is?
Well, there's an interesting question about whether it should be centralized at all. I was talking to, and I'm not a computer scientist in many ways, this is way above my pay grade, but just to talk about what alternatives there might be for a minute. I was talking to a scientist, one of the people who set up the health company at DeepMind, right? So one of the flagship AI companies in this country. And he was talking about developments, scientific developments and things called like federated learning that would actually mean that you could even do this research in theory in ways that mean that you don't have to put it into a data lake. There's and I don't know if you know the beloved boffin Ben Goldacre, the scientist. He spent much of the pandemic working on a system called Open Safely, in which people can do some of the research that we all support, but without having a copy of the data. It sits in a place with a very small number of trusted people. A lot of other people run some queries, but they don't actually get the data itself. And what we don't quite understand is why the health department and NHS Digital haven't talked to people about these alternatives, haven't slowed their roll, and actually set out what the pros and cons of each of these things are.
Might the government in defence suggest that they want to collate and gather all of this information in one place so that it can be accessed easily and ultimately make us all healthier?
Well, it might well be useful, but make your case, right? That's a pretty vague case to be made, right? For taking what is people's very most sensitive information, right? What you have actually sat down and talked to your doctor, what's happened to you and your health record over the years, and putting it into a central database. And again, being very vague about the third parties who can access it. Sure, it may well be useful for a whole bunch of purposes, but you've got to get people's buy-in, and they haven't bothered to do that. We're not saying it doesn't have any uses. We're saying the way that they've gone about it has eroded patient trust.
Yes, Andrew has just tweeted me, Corey, to say, Mark, this transfer and probable sale of medical data is a vaccination passport by the back door. Do you think the two could be connected?
I'm not sure that it is related to vaccination passports, but I think what your commenter there is pointing out is that there has been a really regrettable approach by the health department under Matt Hancock to be slightly techno-solutionist about all of this stuff, right? I mean, I don't know if any of you remember the Matt Hancock app.
Yes.
But there's a kind of idea that we can kind of app our way to a better NHS as opposed to doing things that actually people need, like giving nurses and doctors a pay rise. And again, I don't wish to suggest that we are opposed to medical research. We are not. What we are opposed to is people having this bounced past them in a way that means the vast majority of people won't hear about it and will have no opportunity, like your listeners now have, to think about it and exercise their rights to opt out if they wish.
Yes, and by the way, a techno-solutionist is not a genre of music, I'm told by my young producer. I'll remind our listeners, Corey, that they can go to Med Confidential or just go to Foxglove, and you have, I believe, a Twitter handle, Foxglove, and also a website.
Thank you.
Brilliant stuff, Corey Kreider there, who is